a life-changing diagnosis. Kofi Mensah sat in his opulent office, staring at the neatly folded letter in his trembling hands. The room around him exuded wealth, polished mahogany shelves lined with business awards, fine leather chairs, and a grand floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the bustling city of Accra. But at this moment, none of it mattered. His heart pounded as his eyes remained glued to the words printed on the page. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Terminal. Estimated time left, 1 month. Kofi swallowed hard, his chest tightening with disbelief. This must be a mistake. He felt fine, strong, even. At 55, he was still in his prime, his physique fit from years of disciplined living. He had just undergone a routine checkup, expecting nothing more than a prescription for vitamins. But now, the world as he knew it had shifted. He clenched the letter so tightly that the paper crumpled in his palm. A month. Only 1 month left to live. A billionaire's greatest fear. For most of his life, Kofi had been a man who conquered challenges. Born into poverty, he had clawed his way to the top of the business world, creating one of Ghana's largest real estate empires. His wealth afforded him power, influence, and a legacy that generations would remember. But money could not save him now. His mind raced past his own mortality and fixated on the only 2 people who truly mattered, his wife, Adjoa, and his son, Kwame. Adjoa had been his rock, the love of his life. She had stood by him when he had nothing, long before the luxury cars, the mansions, and the private jets. She had believed in his vision when no one else did. And then there was Kwame, his 10-year-old son, the pride of his heart. Kofi had worked tirelessly to ensure that Kwame's future would be secure, free from the struggles he had endured. But now, an even greater fear crept into his mind. What would happen to them when he was gone? The sisters who would take everything. Kofi's gaze darkened as he thought about his 2 older sisters, Abina and Efua. They had never accepted Adjoa as family. From the moment he had married her, they had seen her as an outsider, an opportunist. They had whispered behind his back, convinced that Adjoa had only married him for his wealth. Their resentment had never faded. A woman like her will bring disgrace to the Mensah family, Abina had once sneered at a family gathering. You could have married someone of your status, Kofi, Efua had added. Instead, you married a common woman. Over the years, their bitterness grew, masked by fake smiles and empty pleasantries. But Kofi was no fool. He knew the truth, his sisters wanted his fortune for themselves. They despised Adjoa and saw Kwame as a mere obstacle standing in the way of their inheritance. And if Kofi truly had only a month left to live, what would stop them from taking everything once he was gone? Nothing. That realization sent a chill down his spine. A plan born from desperation. Kofi leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He could not die without knowing the truth. Would his sisters care for Adjoa and Kwame as family? Would they honor his wishes and protect them? Or would they betray his trust, seize his fortune, and leave his wife and son with nothing? The thought of Adjoa and Kwame suffering after his death was unbearable. Suddenly, a thought flickered in his mind, a dangerous, almost impossible idea. What if he didn't die? At least, not really. What if he faked his death to see how his family would react? The idea sent a rush of adrenaline through his veins. He could stage his own death and watch from the shadows, a silent witness to the truth. If his sisters were genuine in their grief, he would know that they could be trusted. But if they betrayed Adjoa and Kwame, he would have proof. And he would return to set things right. It was extreme. It was deceptive. But Kofi Mensah was a man who took bold risks. And this would be the biggest gamble of his life. Setting the plan in motion. Kofi wasted no time. He called his most trusted employee, Dr. Kwesi Boateng, a private physician who had been his family doctor for years. "I need your help," Kofi said. "And I need your silence." Dr. Boateng frowned. "What is this about, Kofi?" Kofi handed him the medical report. "This diagnosis. I need you to make it public. Tell my family I have a month left." The doctor's eyes widened. "But, why?" Kofi exhaled sharply. "Because I need to know what happens after I'm gone." The doctor hesitated. "Kofi, this is risky." "What if?" "I have no choice," Kofi interrupted. "I need to protect my family." Reluctantly, Dr. Boateng nodded. Within hours, news of Kofi's illness spread like wildfire. His family was devastated. His business associates sent their condolences. Ajua was inconsolable. His sisters, however, Kofi watched them carefully. And for the first time, he saw the glint of something sinister in their eyes. They weren't grieving. They were waiting. The death of Kofi Mensah. A week later, the second phase of Kofi's plan was set into motion. He arranged a fake medical emergency. On a seemingly normal morning, Kofi was found unconscious in his office, slumped over his desk. His assistant called for an ambulance, and paramedics arrived to rush him to the hospital. By the time they reached the emergency room, Dr. Boateng pronounced him dead. The news shattered Ajua. She screamed, sobbed, and collapsed in grief. Kwame was too young to fully understand, but he clung to his mother, his small body shaking with confusion and fear. Meanwhile, Kofi, hidden in a private safe house, watched everything unfold. His heart ached. Seeing his wife and son in pain was more than he had anticipated. But he had to endure it just for a little while longer. Because the real test was about to begin. The sisters revealed their true colors. Within hours of Kofi's death, Abina and Efua took action. Instead of comforting Ajua, they moved swiftly to secure Kofi's fortune. First, they froze all bank accounts, leaving Ajua with no access to money. Next, they took possession of the family mansion, changing security codes and instructing the guards to deny Ajua entry. When Ajua arrived at the house after the funeral, she found the gates locked. She dialed security, her hands shaking. "Open the gate." "Sorry, madam," the guard said, avoiding her gaze. "I have strict instructions. This house belongs to the late Mr. Mensah's sisters now." Ajua's world collapsed around her. She had lost her husband. And now, she had lost everything else. Meanwhile, in his safe house, Kofi's hands clenched into fists as he watched the betrayal unfold. He had his answer. His sisters had failed the test. And soon, they would face the consequences. A funeral full of lies. The grand funeral of Kofi Mensah was held at one of Accra's most prestigious venues. Thousands of people arrived, business tycoons, politicians, and high-profile figures, all gathered to pay their respects to the man who had built an empire from nothing. The large hall was draped in black and gold, the air heavy with the scent of fresh white lilies. The choir sang soft hymns, their voices echoing through the space as a solemn atmosphere blanketed the room. At the front, Ajua sat with Kwame, dressed in black, her eyes swollen from days of crying. Her hands trembled as she clutched her son's small fingers. This wasn't just a funeral for her, it was the death of her entire world. Kwame, only 10 years old, had no full grasp of the situation. He clung to his mother, confused and afraid, his dark eyes searching for his father among the mourners, not understanding why Baba wasn't coming back. But in the midst of all the mourning, two women stood tall, basking in the attention, Abina and Efua, Kofi's older sisters. They wailed dramatically, their sick-clad bodies shaking as they sobbed loudly for all to hear. They clutched their chests, proclaiming their undying love for their beloved brother. "Oh, Kofi. our dear, dear brother. You were our everything. What will we do without you? Abina wailed, her voice carrying across the hall. Gone too soon. Efua added, wiping away fake tears with a lacy handkerchief. It was all an act. From their exaggerated cries to the way they kept glancing around to see who was watching, it was clear they were putting on a show. And while Ajua sat in genuine grief, her world shattered, her mind struggling to accept this terrible loss. Her sisters-in-law were already plotting. The betrayal begins. After the service, Ajua walked numbly toward the family mansion with Kwame by her side. She was exhausted, her legs weak, her heart hollow. All she wanted was to go home, crawl into bed, and cry until there were no more tears left. But as they reached the grand estate, something felt off. The main gate was locked. 2 security guards stood at attention, their faces unreadable. Ajua frowned. Why are the gates closed? She asked, her voice hoarse. The taller guard hesitated. Madam. I'm sorry, but you are not allowed inside. Her heart stopped. She stared at him. What? The guard's eyes darted nervously, but he remained firm. We were given strict instructions by Madam Abina and Madam Efua. The mansion belongs to them now. Ajoa's body went cold. She let out a soft laugh, one filled with disbelief, not humor. I must have misheard you. This is my house. My husband left it for me and my son. Open the gate. The guard swallowed. I'm sorry, madam. There's nothing we can do. Her heart raced. My husband's will states that this house belongs to me. Where are Abina and Efra? I need to speak with them now. As if summoned, Abina and Efra appeared on the balcony, their arms crossed, smirking like queens surveying a defeated enemy. Ajoa, Abina said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. I'm sorry, dear, but you don't belong here anymore. Efra nodded. Yes, we found Kofi's real will. Everything goes to us, his true family. Ajoa's blood ran hot with rage. That's impossible. Kofi would never. Abina cut her off with a sly smile. He did. And now, you and your son need to find somewhere else to live. Ajoa's breath caught in her throat. You would throw out Kofi's son. Your own nephew. Efra scoffed. Kofi's son. How do we even know for sure that the boy is really his? The accusation felt like a slap to Ajoa's face. Tears stung her eyes. How could they be so cruel? She turned back to the guards. Please. You've known Kofi for years. You know this is wrong. But the guards stayed silent. She realized, with a sinking heart, that they had been paid off. She had lost everything. Nowhere to go. Ajoa clutched Kwame's hand tightly and turned away from the mansion, her legs trembling as she walked down the streets of Accra. She had no home, no money, and no one to turn to. Kwame sniffled beside her. Mama, where are we going? She forced a small smile even though she had no answer. Somewhere safe, my love. The night air was cold, and every step they took felt heavier than the last. They passed street vendors, glowing food stalls, and loud traffic, but Ajoa saw none of it. Her mind was spinning. How could Kofi's sisters betray her like this? She had trusted them. And now, she and her son were homeless. Her stomach twisted with fear. She could survive on her own, but Kwame. He was just a child. He deserved safety, warmth, and love. Ajoa silently prayed for a miracle. And then, she saw it. A small building with a simple sign, Women's Support Center. Help for those in need. Her hands shook as she knocked on the door. A moment later, it creaked open, revealing a kind-faced woman in her late 50s. Can I help you, the woman asked gently. Ajoa's throat tightened. She had always been proud, never one to ask for help. But today, she had no choice. With tears welling in her eyes, she whispered, "Please, my son and I have nowhere to go." The woman studied her for a moment, then opened the door wider. "Come in, my dear. You are safe here." A mother's strength. The woman's name was Nanaya, and she ran the shelter with a heart full of kindness. She listened patiently as Ajoa poured out her pain, her fear, her betrayal. She nodded, her wise eyes filled with understanding. "You are stronger than you know, Ajoa. And this is not the end of your story." For the first time in days, Ajoa felt a spark of hope. She wasn't alone. She had Kwame. And now, she had Nanaya. But in a hidden location across the city, Kofi watched everything unfold. His chest ached at the sight of his wife and son suffering. He had expected his sisters to be cruel, but he had not imagined this level of betrayal. Suddenly, his plan didn't feel so wise anymore. How much longer could he stand by and watch the people he loved the most suffer? As he clenched his fists, one thing became clear. He could not stay in the shadows forever. Soon, the world would know that Kofi Mensah was not dead. And when that day came, his sisters would pay for what they had done. A new fire ignites. Ajoa sat on the edge of the small bed inside the women's shelter, her fingers gripping the thin bed sheet beneath her. Her body was exhausted, but her mind was awake, sharp, angry, determined. She had spent the past week mourning, crying, grieving the loss of Kofi. But something inside her had changed. She wasn't just mourning her husband's death anymore. She was angry at the betrayal. She had given her life to this family. She had loved Kofi with everything she had, and in return, his sisters had thrown her and her son out like garbage. No more. She wasn't a weak widow. She was Ajoa Mensah, the wife of Kofi Mensah, the mother of Kwame Mensah. And she would fight. A ray of hope, meeting the lawyer. The next morning, Nanaya walked into the shelter's common area and found Ajoa sitting at a table, staring blankly at a cup of tea. "You didn't sleep," Nanaya observed. Ajoa shook her head. "I can't. I keep thinking. If Kofi really left everything to his sisters, why didn't he tell me? Why wouldn't he have at least provided something for Kwame?" Nanaya placed a comforting hand on Ajoa's shoulder. "That is exactly why you need to see someone. I made a call last night. I found a lawyer willing to help you." Ajoa's eyes widened. "A lawyer?" "Yes," Nanaya nodded. "His name is Kojo Amankwa. He specializes in estate disputes. He's expecting us in an hour." Hope sparked in Ajoa's chest for the first time in weeks. Maybe, just maybe, she could fight back. The truth about the will. Kojo Amankwa's office was small but professional. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a sharp mind, listened intently as Ajoa explained everything: Kofi's sudden illness, his unexpected death, and how his sisters took everything within hours. When she finished, Kojo leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. "This does not sound right," he finally said. Ajoa frowned. "What do you mean?" Kojo stippled his fingers. "A will is a legally binding document, but there are laws in place to protect spouses and children. Even if Kofi had left something for his sisters, you and your son would have still inherited a portion of his estate." Ajoa's heart pounded. "Then why did they take everything?" Kojo exhaled sharply. "Because there's a strong possibility that the will was forged." A chill ran down Ajoa's spine. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Kojo nodded. The speed at which they took over, the fact that they immediately changed security at the mansion, the way they locked you out, it all suggests that they had already planned this before Kofi even died. Ajoa's hands clenched into fists. So it had never been about grief. It had been about greed all along. "What can I do?" she asked. Kojo gave her a firm look. "We fight back. But we need something strong, proof that the will was altered or fake." Ajua inhaled sharply. "Then let's get proof." The power of social media. Kojo advised her to make her story public. "The court process can take time, and your husband's sisters clearly have power and connections," he explained. "But the court of public opinion, that moves much faster." That evening, with the help of Nanaya, Ajua sat in front of an old laptop camera and went live. The video started simply. "Hello. My name is Ajua Mensah. My husband was the billionaire Kofi Mensah. And this is how his family stole everything from me and my son." She spoke from her heart, telling the world about her love for Kofi, the betrayal by his sisters, and her struggle to protect their son. She showed the text and emails she had sent to Abina and Efua, begging them for a chance to simply collect her belongings. She played the audio recordings of the security guards refusing her entry. She asked the public for help in exposing the truth. And the response was instantaneous. Going viral. Within 24 hours, Ajua's video was shared across social media platforms. News stations picked it up. Celebrities, journalists, and activists amplified her voice. People began demanding justice, calling for an investigation into Kofi Mensah's will. A GoFundMe campaign was set up to help Ajua and Kwame. In just 3 days, it raised over 100,000 cedis. Meanwhile, Abina and Efua were completely blindsided. They had expected Ajua to disappear in silence. Instead, she had become the voice of every woman wronged by a greedy family. The sisters turned against each other. Abina and Efua initially ignored the media storm, believing it would fade away. But as the pressure increased, they turned on each other. "This was your idea, Efua," Abina snapped during one of their secret meetings. "No, you were the one who wanted everything for yourself," Efua retorted. Their fights grew uglier. They began accusing each other of stealing from the estate, lying, and keeping extra assets hidden. Meanwhile, Kofi Mensah, still watching from the shadows, saw everything. His sister's true colors were clearer than ever. They didn't love him. They never had. They only loved his money. And now, they were tearing each other apart over it. Kofi's plan to return. Kofi sat alone in his hidden apartment, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He had seen enough. His heart had ached watching Ajua suffer. But now, something else burned inside him, rage. His sisters had not just betrayed his wife, they had betrayed him. They had used his death to satisfy their greed. They had lied, stolen, and destroyed the family he had worked so hard to build. It was time to end this deception. He pulled out his phone and dialed the one person he could trust, Kojo Amankwa. The lawyer answered immediately. "Kofi, are you sure you're ready for this?" Kofi's jaw tightened. It's time to come back from the dead. An unexpected turn. Just as Kofi was preparing to reveal himself, something happened that changed everything. A mysterious document surfaced online. It was an anonymous leak, a copy of Kofi's original will. And in it, he had left everything to Ajua and Kwame. The internet erupted in outrage. People demanded the sisters be arrested for forgery and fraud. And then came the final blow. An investigative journalist uncovered that Abina and Efua had bribed Kofi's doctor to fake his diagnosis in order to speed up his death. The truth was finally out. Kofi froze as he read the reports. His sisters hadn't just stolen from Ajua. They had tried to kill him. His hands trembled as he clenched his phone. This was no longer about justice. This was war. And Kofi Mensah was coming back to finish it. The backlash begins. Abina and Efua had spent their entire lives enjoying the privileges of being part of the wealthy Mensah family. But for the first time, their power and influence were slipping through their fingers. The scandal had gone global. Social media was flooded with posts condemning their cruelty toward Adjoa and Kwame. #Justice for Adjoa and #Mensah scandal began trending across Ghana. Major news outlets covered the story, painting the sisters as greedy and deceitful villains who had robbed a grieving widow and her child of their rightful inheritance. At first, Abina and Efua tried to ignore the media storm, convinced it would pass. But as the days went by, the pressure grew unbearable. Protests formed outside the Mensah mansion, with angry citizens demanding that the sisters return what they had stolen. Even their closest friends began to distance themselves, unwilling to be associated with them. Their perfect world was falling apart. And so, in a moment of desperation, they made a reckless move, one that would change everything. The ultimate lie. Abina and Efua gathered their team of lawyers and peer experts for an emergency meeting inside the mansion. "We need to take control of this narrative," Abina said, pacing the floor. Efua nodded, eyes filled with cold calculation. "We have to turn the public against Adjoa." One of their lawyers hesitated. "But how? The evidence is already against us." Abina's lips curled into a cunning smile. "We attack her reputation." Efua leaned forward. "We make people doubt her. We make them believe that Kwame isn't Kofi's real son." The room fell silent. Then a wicked grin spread across Abina's face. "Exactly. We release a document, something that suggests Kofi questioned Kwame's paternity before he died. If people believe Adjoa was lying all along, they'll turn against her." One of their advisors cleared his throat. "But, do we have any proof of that?" Abina waved a hand dismissively. "Who cares about proof? We'll create one." The forged document was prepared within hours, a fake letter, allegedly written by Kofi before his death, stating that he had doubts about whether Kwame was his biological son. The sisters leaked the document to multiple news outlets, and within hours, it spread like wildfire. The internet turns on Adjoa. At the women's shelter, Adjoa sat in stunned silence, staring at her phone. The headline on the screen made her stomach turn. "New evidence suggests Kwame Mensah is not Kofi's son. Did Adjoa lie for wealth?" Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the comments. "Small blue diamond, if this is true, Adjoa is nothing but a gold digger." "Small blue diamond, I knew something felt off about her story." "Small blue diamond, she played the victim, but she's just another fraud." The very people who had once supported her were now turning against her. Her chest tightened with grief and fury. How could Abina and Efua sink so low? She had lost her husband. She had lost her home. And now, they were trying to take her son's identity from him. Kwame, who had been sitting nearby, noticed her expression. "Mama," he asked, his voice small. Adjoa wiped her tears quickly and forced a smile. "It's okay, my love. Mama is just tired." But inside, her heart was breaking. Kwame didn't understand what was happening. He didn't know that the people who were supposed to love him, his own aunts, were publicly rejecting him. But he felt it. The way people whispered when they saw them on the streets. The way the children at the shelter looked at him differently. He felt unwanted. And that was something Adjoa could not forgive. A DNA test, blocked. Nana Ya had seen enough. "We need to shut them down," she told Adjoa family. "The fastest way to prove they're lying is a DNA test." Adjoa nodded. "Yes. If I take the test and prove Kwame is Kofi's son, their lies will be exposed." But when they reached out to the Mensah family lawyers, the response was chilling. A DNA test cannot proceed without Kofi Mensah's genetic sample. Unfortunately, none is available. Adjoa gritted her teeth. Of course. Abina and Efua had already destroyed every piece of evidence that could clear her name. They're blocking every move we make, Ajua whispered. They won't even let us take a simple test. Nanaya folded her arms. That only proves one thing. Ajua looked at her. What? They know the truth, Nanaya said. And they are terrified that the world will find out. Kofi watches with rage. From his hidden apartment, Kofi Mensah sat in front of his laptop, watching the chaos unfold. His sisters had done the unthinkable. They had lied about his son. His blood boiled as he read the false headlines, the public turning against Ajua. The woman he loved, the mother of his child, was being humiliated, ridiculed, and painted as a liar. Kwame, his innocent little boy, was being mocked and rejected because of their greed. Enough. This was the final straw. Kofi picked up his phone and called Kojo Amankwa, the lawyer helping Ajua. Kojo, he said, his voice deadly calm. Prepare everything. I'm coming back. The calm before the storm. Back at the shelter, Ajua sat beside Nanaya, her body exhausted but her spirit unbroken. We need another way to prove the truth, she murmured. Nanaya nodded. We'll find a way, Ajua. The truth always comes out. Ajua wanted to believe that. But she felt like she was fighting a war with no weapons. As she tucked Kwame into bed that night, she ran her fingers through his hair, whispering a promise. I will protect you, my son. No matter what it takes. She had no idea that her world was about to change forever. Because somewhere in Accra, Kofi Mensah was walking out of the shadows. And his sisters were about to learn that the dead do not stay buried. The courtroom battle begins. Ajua stood outside the Grand Supreme Court of Ghana, staring up at its towering pillars. The weight of the past few months bore down on her shoulders, but she stood tall. Today was the day she fought for justice. With Kojo Amankwa at her side, she was prepared to prove that the will Abina and Efua had presented was fraudulent. The evidence was stacked against them, documents had been forged, assets stolen, and her son's legitimacy publicly questioned. She had endured enough. She clenched her fist, thinking of Kwame, who was at the women's shelter with Nanaya. She would win this for him. Inside the courtroom, journalists and spectators filled the seats, eager to witness what had become the most sensational legal case in Ghana. Ajua took her place at the plaintiff's table, her heart pounding. Across from her, Abina and Efua sat stiffly, their lawyers whispering in hushed voices. The judge entered, and the courtroom fell into silence. This court is now in session, the bailiff announced. Ajua's case had officially begun. And then, everything changed. The shocking entrance. Just as the judge was about to begin, a commotion erupted at the entrance of the courtroom. A sharp gasp spread through the crowd as the doors swung open. A man walked in. The air froze. Ajua's breath caught in her throat. Her knees weakened as she stared in disbelief. The entire room fell silent as Kofi Mensah, alive, well, and very much breathing, strode into the courtroom. Journalists leaped from their seats, cameras flashing as chaos erupted. This is impossible, someone shouted. Is that Kofi Mensah? The judge slammed his gavel. Order in the court. But nothing could calm the storm that had just begun. Abina and Efua's faces drained of color. Their jaws dropped in horror. For months, they had believed their brother was dead. And now, he stood before them, staring at them with pure fury. Kofi's eyes scanned the room, finally landing on Ajua. Her lips trembled as she whispered, Kofi. A storm of emotions. Ajua felt dizzy. Her chest tightened with conflicting emotions, relief, rage, heartbreak. She had spent months grieving him, suffering at the hands of his sisters, fighting for their son's dignity. And all this time, he had been watching. Tears burned in her eyes as anger overtook her sorrow. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Kofi's expression softened. "Ajua." But she stepped back. "You let me suffer, Kofi. You let me believe you were gone." The pain in her voice made his chest tighten. But before he could say another word, Abina's shrill voice cut through the air. "You're supposed to be dead." All eyes turned to Kofi's sisters. Their hands shook, their faces pale with fear. Kofi took a step forward, his voice low and sharp. "Disappointed to see me alive, sisters?" Abina's mouth opened and closed, her mind scrambling for an explanation. Efua shook her head in disbelief. "Kofi, this is a lie, right?" Efua stammered. "This is some cruel trick." Kofi let out a humorless chuckle. "No, Efua. The only trick was the one you and Abina pulled. The truth comes out." Kofi walked to the witness stand and faced the judge. "Your Honor," he said, his voice clear and commanding. "I faked my death to test the loyalty of my family. I had to see the truth for myself." Gasps filled the courtroom. Kofi turned toward his sisters, his voice dripping with anger. "And in my absence, these women, my own blood, prove just how disloyal and greedy they are." The judge narrowed his eyes. "Do you have proof of these allegations?" Kofi nodded. "I have months of surveillance footage, recorded conversations, and financial records showing their fraudulent activity." Kojo Amankwa stepped forward, handing the judge a thick folder. "This evidence," Kojo explained, "proves that Abina and Efua forged a fake will, bribed officials, and illegally transferred assets to their names." The judge examined the documents, his expression darkening. Kofi continued. "They stole from my wife. They tried to erase my son's legacy. And when Ajua fought back, they smeared her name with lies." He turned to the courtroom, his voice thundering. "These women do not deserve to carry the Mensa name." The sisters' downfall. Abina jumped from her seat, panic overtaking her face. "This is a setup. Kofi is lying. That evidence is fake." The judge slammed his gavel. "Silence, Miss Mensa." Efua clutched her head, shaking with fear. They had lost. The truth was out. The entire courtroom now knew they had stolen Kofi's fortune, lied about Kwame, and betrayed their own family. Abina's legs shook as she turned to Kofi. "Kofi, please. We are your sisters. We can fix this." But Kofi's expression was ice cold. "You are no longer my family." Tears streamed down Abina's face. Efua covered her mouth, shaking her head. The judge cleared his throat. Given the overwhelming evidence, the court rules in favor of Ajua Mensah and her son, Kwame Mensah. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Abina and Efua sat frozen, horrified. They had lost everything. Justice is served. The final ruling was swift and brutal. Small Blue Diamond, all of Kofi's assets were returned to Ajua and Kwame. Small Blue Diamond, the sisters were stripped of their wealth and removed from Kofi's businesses. Small Blue Diamond, they were banned from high society and left disgraced. As the verdict was announced, security escorted Abina and Efua out of the courtroom. They were jeered at by the crowd, their once glamorous reputation destroyed. For the first time in their lives, they had nothing. And as they were dragged away, Efua turned back to Kofi, her voice filled with desperation. "Kofi, please. Don't do this to us." But Kofi didn't flinch. "This is what you did to yourselves." The door slammed shut behind them. A bittersweet reunion. After the ruling, Kofi turned to Ajua. Her eyes were filled with hurt, love, and confusion. "I never meant to hurt you," Kofi said, stepping closer. "I wanted to test my sisters, but I never imagined the pain it would cause you. Ajua shook her head. You let me suffer, Kofi. You watched as I lost everything. Tears welled in Kofi's eyes. I thought I was protecting you. Ajua exhaled. No. You broke me. Kofi reached for her hand. Can we fix this? She hesitated. Then, a small voice broke the silence. Boba. Kofi turned sharply. Standing in the hallway was Kwame. His eyes were wide, tears streaming down his little face. Kofi knelt down, arms open. Come here, my son. Kwame ran into his arms, sobbing. I missed you, Boba. Kofi held him tightly, tears falling from his own eyes. I missed you too, my boy. More than you'll ever know. Ajua watched them and felt her heart ache. She wasn't ready to forgive Kofi yet. But for Kwame's sake, she was willing to try. And maybe, just maybe, one day, they would be whole again. The aftermath of betrayal. The courtroom battle was over. Justice had been served. Abina and Efra had been stripped of their stolen wealth, their reputations were destroyed, and they were cast out from high society. But as the dust settled, one truth remained: Kofi had returned, but everything had changed. Ajua stood outside the Supreme Court of Ghana, staring at the man she had once loved with all her heart. Kofi watched her cautiously, searching her face for any sign of warmth, but all he saw was pain and distrust. They had won the battle. But could they ever be a family again? A family torn apart. The ride back to the Mensah estate was silent. Kwame sat between his parents in the back seat, holding tightly onto both their hands, unwilling to let go. His innocent heart still saw them as a unit, but Ajua knew the truth: they weren't the same anymore. When they arrived at the mansion, Kofi hesitated before speaking. I know this isn't easy, he said, his voice quiet. But we are home now. Together. Ajua inhaled sharply, staring at the place she had been thrown out of months ago. The pain was still fresh. She turned to him, her voice cold. You let me suffer, Kofi. You let Kwame suffer. Kofi flinched. Ajua, She held up a hand. No excuses. She stepped past him and walked inside with Kwame. Kofi followed, but deep in his heart, he knew that coming home didn't mean they were healed. The weight of regret. That night, Kofi stood alone on the balcony of their bedroom, staring at the city lights. For years, he had been the master of control in business, in life. But now, everything felt out of his hands. Ajua barely spoke to him, only answering when necessary. And Kwame, though overjoyed that his father was back, was still shaken by the trauma of the past few months. Kofi had wanted to test his sisters. Instead, he had broken his family. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He had thought he was protecting them. But what kind of protection let the people you love suffer? Ajua's pain. In the guest room, Ajua sat on the bed, staring at the ceiling. She had waited so long for this moment, to reclaim what was rightfully hers. And yet, it felt hollow. She had loved Kofi with every piece of her heart. She had grieved him, defended his honor, fought for their son. And all that time, he had been watching from the shadows. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Could she ever forgive him? An apology from the heart. The next morning, Kofi stood outside Ajua's room, his heart heavy with guilt. He knocked softly. Ajua, he said. Please, can we talk? She hesitated. Then, finally, she opened the door. He stepped inside, his hands shaking. For the first time in his life, Kofi Mensah, the billionaire, the businessman, the powerful mogul, felt powerless. He sank to his knees. Ajua's eyes widened. Kofi, what are you? I'm sorry, he whispered. Tears filled his eyes. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought testing my sisters was necessary. But I never wanted to hurt you. Ajua's heart clenched. I let you grieve, I let you suffer, I let you be humiliated in public. And that is my biggest regret. He looked up at her, desperate. Tell me how to fix this. Please. Ajua stared at him, her own eyes misty. She wanted to forgive him. But the pain was still too fresh. She took a deep breath. I don't know if I can trust you again, Kofi, she said softly. But for Kwame's sake, I will try. Healing takes time. Trying was the hardest part. For weeks, Kofi did everything he could to earn back Ajua's trust. Small Blue Diamond, he spent more time with Kwame, making up for the months of absence. Small Blue Diamond, he stepped away from his businesses, prioritizing family over work. Small Blue Diamond, he supported Ajua's healing, listening instead of just apologizing. There were good days and bad days. There were days when Ajua laughed at his jokes, and days when she barely looked at him. But Kofi didn't give up. Because love required patience. A new beginning. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Kofi and Ajua stood side by side on the balcony. For the first time in months, the silence between them wasn't heavy with pain. I never thought I'd be here again, Ajua admitted. Kofi looked at her. And now? She sighed. I still don't know if I'll ever fully forgive you. Kofi swallowed. I understand. She turned to him, her voice softer. But I do know that I still love you. Kofi's breath hitched. I love you too, he whispered. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you. Ajua didn't answer. But for the first time, she didn't step away. Maybe trust couldn't be rebuilt overnight. But it could be rebuilt, piece by piece. Cutting ties for good. As part of his final decision, Kofi cut all ties with his sisters. He sold the Mensa mansion and moved his family to a new home, free from the ghost of the past. He ensured that Abina and Efua could never manipulate anyone again. They had lost everything, and they would never get it back. It was a final act of protection for his wife and son. Because this time, he would never let anyone hurt them again. A message of love, trust, and redemption. Months later, on Kwame's birthday, the family gathered in their new home. Laughter filled the air as Kwame ran around the garden, playing with his friends. Kofi watched him, then turned to Ajua. This, he said, taking her hand, is what I almost lost. Ajua smiled. But you didn't, she said. Because in the end, you came back. Kofi squeezed her hand. And as they watched their son play, they knew that the past would always remain a part of them. But the future was theirs to rebuild. The end.